Hello, friends, it's Mr. Review, and welcome to another episode of Daily TIPP. Trump is President Primer. In this episode, we will be looking at presidential appointments. Boy, has government changed. You know, back in our early days, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, the entire federal government was comprised of less than 3,000 total employees. Of those, George Washington, for instance, he appointed about 135 to the executive branch in Washington, D.C. Wow. Today, Donald Trump is looking at appointing over 3,000 himself in an executive branch comprised of over 2.5 million civilian employees. Our government certainly has grown. When looking at today's appointees, I'm reminded of that political scientist Richard Newstead who said, "New presidents suffer 3 curses. Curse 1, arrogance. Curse 2, adrenaline. And curse 3, naivete." Seemingly all 3 curses speak to presidential appointees. Let's take a look. Presidential arrogance. When Donald Trump appoints his cabinet or members to executive agencies or filling deputy positions throughout the executive branch, there's a certain arrogance involved. The arrogance is, I've won the election, therefore I get to choose whoever I want. Clearly, the appointee process has become more politicized. The spoils system is still in play. When looking at Donald Trump's appointees, or even any president for that matter, they tend to emphasize loyalty over competence. This serves a bit of a problem and speaks to the arrogance of presidents. Shouldn't we expect those that understand how to manage the cabinet position they've been appointed to? But so many of these appointees have no government experience. Some would even be called dilettantes. Are they qualified? This is the arrogance that's involved in creating a government of loyal patrons rather than competent managers. I call this arrogance. But how about adrenaline? The adrenaline is Donald Trump, along with every president for that matter, wants these appointees to be confirmed right away, as soon as possible. After all, Congress, the Senate, who is responsible for confirming, has deferred over the years to presidential appointees. Do you realize, as of today at least, the last time the Senate rejected a presidential nominee or appointee for the cabinet, for instance, the last time someone has been rejected was back in 1989, John Tower, George H.W. Bush's nominee, appointee for Department of Defense. And in fact, since the 1800s, there have been less than 10 presidential appointees who've been rejected. That adrenaline kicks in. Appoint them now. If you're going to defer to me anyway, why not confirm now? It's a battle of wills between the president, the executive branch, and the Senate, particularly the minority party, who will do anything they can to obstruct in order to embarrass the sitting president. In all defense, however, to the minority, let's acknowledge that checks and balances and separation of powers is important. The Federalist Papers were more than just parchment barriers, as is the Constitution. We would expect CIA, FBI background checks. We would expect ethical papers to be filled out. We would expect every worker of our federal government to go through at least what you and I go through when we apply for work. The adrenaline of the president kicks in. He wants his appointees passed now. I'm arguing maybe taking a little time isn't all that bad after all. So we understand in the appointee process, presidents suffer arrogance, also the curse of adrenaline, but let's not forget the curse of naivete. When presidents appoint members to the executive branch, it would be naive to think that this doesn't give the opportunity to the Senate to pose for the cameras themselves. It's naive to imagine that all this opposition is somehow unheard of or unexpected. Members of Congress like cameras too. They've got re-elections coming up in 2 short years. Many of them are targeting voters back in their home states who need for them to stand up to Donald Trump, or at least to ask tough questions, even sitting Republicans. It's also naive to think that these cabinet members will step right in and make significant change. Let's not forget, although Donald Trump is appointing over 3,000 to the executive branch, this is a total less than 2% of the total executive branch. Life-serving, career-serving civil servants, I'm not so sure if the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of the Interior is going to join the Interior Department and in a matter of days make much difference. These departments are well entrenched in policies, and it will take a lot longer than a day or two to change those policies. It's naive for the president to imagine that waiting a day, a week, or even a month is going to change things all that much. I would say this, when looking at the appointment process, certain factors have changed. Not just the size of government, but the number of vacancy rates. The President of the United States is constantly filling empty seats that require his appointment and requires Senate confirmation. The process over time has increased. Something else to acknowledge is that there are delays in nominations. Donald Trump is not going to fill all 3,000 in the first week of his office. In fact, at any given time, there may be as many as 10 to 20% of the appointed positions that are left unfulfilled and unfilled. Something else that we've seen in recent years and recent presidents is that talented appointees have decided to opt out. The process is too strenuous, government work is too difficult, and the grind and inquisition of the checks and balance system, they just say, leave me out. Not only are vacancy rates increasing, and not only are there delays in the confirmation process, and not only are talented appointees often opting out, turnover rates have increased. When looking at recent presidents, the appointments that they've made, the average appointment made by the president, confirmed by the Senate, stays in that office for less than 2 years. That's not a very long time. You're putting a lot of this energy and time into filling these critical positions. You've taken the political capital out to say how important it is, confirm them now, and the whole process kicks into gear in just a few months again. Turnover rates are high. But also, let's be fair. Oftentimes those Senate questions are gotcha questions. The Senate confirmation process oftentimes sounds way too political for my own good. If they're qualified, if they've passed the FBI background checks, fulfill ethical requirements, it's time to confirm and let them do the work of the people. We're looking at Donald Trump and the appointment process. We've acknowledged the curses that Richard Newstead warned us about years ago. New presidents suffer under the curse of arrogance, adrenaline, and naivete. It would seem to me, when looking at all three of these curses, there's a civics lesson in there about the appointment process. You've been listening to another daily tip. Trump is President Primer. My name is Mr. Review, and I'm here to make the complex simple and the confusing clear.